Hey everyone, this is Soraya from Purposeful Professional Media, and today we have a special guest on the podcast. Sometimes you are blessed enough to meet someone who has a voice and energy that moves the room. That person is today's guest, Dwayne Griffith. Dwayne is the outstanding entrepreneur and intrapreneur that is a director at the Watson Institute, a leading social entrepreneurship center for international and global entrepreneurs. He is a proud native of St. Martin, a Caribbean through and through, and someone with a gift to inspire and uplift. Meeting Dwayne in Colorado made me realize how impactful his leadership, presence, and ability to connect with others is, and I knew that I had to interview him. Dwayne and I discussed the importance of funding for diverse entrepreneurs, his childhood in St. Martin, serving on youth parliament, and his work to bring entrepreneurship opportunities to the Caribbean. If you want to listen and learn about someone who was born to lead, then this is the episode for you. Let's take a listen. Okay, hello everybody. This is Soraya Walters from the Purposeful Professional, and today I have a really special guest. I have Dwayne Griffith, entrepreneur, advocate for entrepreneurs. I would say like a light in the entrepreneurial ecosystem that is existing to make things better, not only for just entrepreneurs in the United States and the Caribbean, but across the world. So I really am excited to share his story, share his wisdom and his insight and his energy with the podcast guest. I think y'all are going to be energized and inspired today. So Dwayne, please introduce yourself to the people on the podcast.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Soraya. Hello, listeners. Hello, viewers. Thank you all for having me today. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. As Soraya said, I am Dwayne Griffith. Grew up on the island of St. Martin in the Caribbean, and now I work in the intersection of Intrapreneurship and Entrepreneurship, where I serve as the Vice President of Programs at Watson Institute. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to sharing my story and just having a delightful conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited. And I love that you said the intersection of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship, because here on this podcast, we know entrepreneurs keep existing organizations going, thriving. They keep them sustainable through innovation within. So that's just as important as entrepreneurship, right? The innovation on its own outside of traditional or existing organizations. So thank you for sharing that. So one thing we like to do with all our guests is a segment called Pop Purpose. And in this segment, we want to talk about a pop culture topic relevant to the guest's expertise. And I figured because you are an advocate for entrepreneurs, an entrepreneur yourself, and a leader in the ecosystem, I wanted to talk a little bit about the VC funding and Black entrepreneurs. So we have this article that talked about the huge funding, the drop in VC funding for Black entrepreneurs and Black-owned startups. There wasn't really much funding to go around to begin with for people of color, for minorities, but especially for Black entrepreneurs. So we want to get into some questions about the ecosystem and kind of hear some of your honest thoughts and opinions on it. So my first question for you is, a VC for Black entrepreneurs continues to plummet. Like, why do you think institutional funders are not abiding by the DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, based promises that they declared in 2020?
Such a great question, and thank you for asking. So I can take this from two approaches. As you mentioned, there hasn't been a lot of funding for Black entrepreneurs generally. However, after the shooting of George Floyd, we saw an increase in terms of promises made to entrepreneurs with their DEI commitments. Now, I think it's a systemic issue here, because these companies went ahead, they made their commitments, but they didn't apprentice with the problem. And they didn't look to change their internal system in terms of how they deliver funding, how they source founders, how they understand the communities that they work with. So when it comes to systemic change, we talk about apprenticing the problem, understanding the problem, the solution landscape, what's out there. In these major hubs, majority of these funders give funding to people who look like them, to problems they've seen before, to problems they understand. So if they don't take the time to understand the Black community and the problems that they face, how are they going to give them funding or open up that pipeline? So yes, they can make these promises, and some of them turned out statements within 2 to 3 weeks and were very public about it. However, I think the crux of the issue here is that their systems didn't change. So as we look years later down the line, they're still providing funding, they're still sourcing their funding, they're still doing everything in the same exact way they did it pre-pandemic, which didn't make the change, and hence why you saw the rise in 2020, and then now you're seeing the decline.
Yeah, no, that is extremely insightful. And that's why I want to have that discussion with you, because I feel like you see firsthand these problems. I think that's an extremely insightful response. And it just speaks to the fact that we can put money up, we can throw money at things, but we also have to think about the systems. Like you said, sourcing, even how we're distributing the funds, like is all of that equitable as well? So I definitely love that. But I also want to know for you as a Caribbean entrepreneur, because my family might be Caribbean, but I don't really know about entrepreneurship in the islands, in the Caribbean, and like how that's going. As a Caribbean entrepreneur, do you see the trend of VC declining for Black entrepreneurs in the US, expanding into the Caribbean? Is it similar? Is there a similar thing happening there?
Well, I won't use the term decline. I think historically we've had a lot of smaller markets. Our ecosystems were less developed. There's a lot of focus on tourism, agricultures, and some of the hurdles Caribbean entrepreneurs face in general is limited access to local funding. The fact that we have a less developed infrastructure, there are fewer accelerators and incubators that are local to help them on their journey. So when it comes to entrepreneurs on small island developing states, whether that is in the Caribbean or in the Pacific, what we see is there are a lot of conversations happening now, and a lot of entrepreneurs would have to obviously leave their hometown, go abroad, get access to these fundings, and then come back. But there's a very specific, theme. It has to, again, for the investor, quote unquote, make enough sense. Although it's solving a lot of their solutions may solve a lot of the issues that Caribbean people face. If the investor feels like their return on investment is not bigger enough, there's still a challenge there. So I think it's all about finding the balance. But there has been a lot of startups and a lot of movement where many people again are making commitments to support entrepreneurs on small island developing states. So there is an increase in funding over the past couple of years in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I won't say as much as a decline, because we started from not really having much to people actually starting to seeing the importance of investing in small islands.
Yeah, I know. I definitely understand what you're saying. And the reason why I asked that question after I answered the first one is because I think for a lot of people, you talked about there not being a understanding of the problem. And I was thinking if domestic, I could say Black American or US bred startups are going through this situation, what about the entrepreneurs who want to work in emerging markets or emerging economies, who want to go either come from the Caribbean into the US, like you said, get the funding to go back there, or either are in the US right now and want to serve their home countries, whether in the Caribbean or Africa? There isn't that understanding. There isn't that cultural understanding. And like you said, if investors don't understand the problem, how are they going to be able to fund it?
It brings me back to the thing of apprenticing the problem. If you want to make these investments and stuff like that, yes, you can think about, okay, your experience and what you've learned, but you need to do, again, additional research in the markets and understanding the entrepreneurs, because the entrepreneurs from small islands may need different resources than entrepreneurs in the US. So it's for example, if you want to support entrepreneurs on small islands, you have to understand that historically, many of them start businesses and projects for their livelihoods, right? So some of the work I'm doing down there is helping these entrepreneurs find that structure and have that foundation so that they can break into the US market and more or less adapt a little bit more to the US market so that these investors and these programs can find them a bit more interesting.
Yeah, it brings me back to the quote, one of my favorite quotes, that talent is equally distributed, opportunity is not. And if I can think about the fact that there's so many people who haven't got the chance to, even pitch their innovation and what they're coming up with to people who can write that small check or that first check. I'm sure you're familiar with the friends and family round that a lot of people talk about. When you start a business at first, especially if you're starting it in the Caribbean, you're dependent on whoever can stretch $1 to you. Unfortunately, for US entrepreneurs, specifically those of color, the situation isn't much better. So I think that it's this aspect of, we know that the talent is there. We know that the black talent is here in the US and the Caribbean and Africa, but what are we really doing to support that talent? And what are we really doing to provide opportunities for that talent? So thank you for that, because that led me into thinking about that powerful quote about the fact that talent is everywhere, but the opportunity really isn't.
Couldn't have said it better, because like, you know, we talk about this all the time. It's like we don't have friends and family around. Sometimes I'm here in the US and like we have to send funding back to like, you know, support our families. So when it comes to starting a business, friends and family around is sometimes is not the options, because we don't have access to that wealth, or like, you know, we're not even in proximity of it.
Yeah, absolutely. What? No, Western Union knows that the money's going back to the relatives. Yes, it does. They absolutely know where Caribbean people, especially those in the U.S., where the money's going. Right. So that's definitely true. So I want to know, like, what can accelerators, incubators, investors, etc., what can they do to better support Black entrepreneurs given this sort of fundraising outlook?
Yeah, and now as we look at the outlook, like, you know, there are a lot of like, you know, capital firms right now that are actually investing in like, you know, diverse led. So we can talk about Lightship Capital, Backstage Capital, Fearless Fund, Harlem Capital, Kapoor Capital. There are so many who's like, you know, actively invested in diverse led like, you know, businesses. But I also want to shed light on like, you know, programs like Black VC that helps like, you know, they have multiple programs that helps people where they're in the first year, the 5 year of their career break into VC. So I think what I see in the outlook in general is that there are a lot of like, you know, programs out there that are helping people of color like myself, like, you know, become investors and like, you know, paving the way for ourselves. But then on the other side, accelerators, incubators, what they need to like, you know, look out for is like, you know, those promises they made, just look at their systems, right? Like, you know, always going back to systems and saying, hey, are the systems that we have in place actually helping the entrepreneurs that we really want to help? And if not, then reevaluate.
Absolutely. 100%. You named pretty much all of the capitals that we know as minority founders. But also, I just finished reading Your First Million by Arlen Hamilton, who is the founder of Backstage. So I've been looking at what they're doing. And then, of course, I'm familiar with Harlem, and I'm familiar with all of the venture capital firms that you named. Fearless Fund had its controversy. We have an episode talking about it coming out for the podcast. So I'm familiar with all of those firms, but I still feel like those firms just aren't enough, you know, and I still feel like they have far more demand than they can meet. And I respect them for doing the work, but I love the fact that you said it's also about sourcing. And I feel like it's everybody. I like, as somebody who's in the DEI space, I know diversity is everybody's issue. Equity is everybody's issue. Inclusion is everybody's issue. So while I acknowledge the work of the, you know, the fearless funds of the world, I also want, like somebody talked about like Sequoia Capital, like I want the traditional, I guess you could say white-led funds to understand the gravity of the power that they have to help communities that have been overlooked, that haven't even really seen themselves as innovators. So I love that you said it's not just about having these funding institutions, getting more people of color and Black people into VC, but also about building systems where people can even see themselves as entrepreneurs. Or if you are an entrepreneur, not think, oh, I'm about to be broke for 5 to 10 years to 12 years. You know, we should have those opportunities to see ourselves represented, to see that it's possible for us, even at the ground level. And I think with resources at every single step, we can truly make it. And the wealth gap, I can't say will be closed, but it can start to narrow a bit. Yeah.
Beautifully said. I have nothing to add there. I think you covered it all.
Yeah, thank you. Well, this is a conversation, so I'm happy to hop in with you. So I want to know, like, my last question in this pop purpose section is, as someone who works in the entrepreneur ecosystem and you see the importance of funding, whether that's grant funding, seed stage checks, angel checks, you've seen the importance of funding, especially for minority entrepreneurs. What would you say to venture capitalists if we were to just give you the spotlight and say, Dwayne, talk to these VCs and tell them about the importance of diverse funding, diverse entrepreneurs? Like, what would you say to them?
I would say there's a lot of talent, as you mentioned. There's a lot of ideas that they probably haven't seen, right? And it's all about like, you know, betting on these entrepreneurs, like, you know, long term. But it's all about like the first thing I think they would need to do, I've said it 100 times in the past 14 minutes, is check your systems, right? The only way you can write checks, support these entrepreneurs is looking at, where do you look for these entrepreneurs? How do they get access to you? Do you work with smaller incubators and accelerator programs to, like, have a pipeline of these entrepreneurs that you support? Like, what are the systems that are in place that puts you in a position to support more underrepresented entrepreneurs?
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you for that. I totally 100% agree. And yeah, Dwayne said it. And we might get this loop going around on social media. Check your systems. Absolutely. I agree. Check your systems. You can't just throw money at people. And I would also say check your support system, because it's also a crime to give a founder, a underrepresented founder, $1 million, $2 million seed stage, but not provide the support and the resources. You talked about people having to give money back home, send money back home to family, like all these things. Check the support systems. Are the support
Wait,
systems in
I,
place?
I want to touch one more thing on that, because I think it's very important that you mention, like, the support. Because when you do give them the funding, like, what is the support they get from now or until the next couple of years when they do have to, like, report? Of course, they'll send in, like, periodically reports, but if you do not give them support in terms of how to spend, or, like, look to see, okay, what do these entrepreneurs really need to be successful? Because sometimes, yeah, they receive the money. And I think this is where the conversation, and me and a couple of, like, colleagues and friends have had these conversations deeply about, well, some entrepreneurs say, well, they're not ready yet. Okay, how can you make them ready? Right? Do you want to take that extra step to provide a support system? But also, when you look at your support system as a company, you have people who look like them represented on your boards as your advisors, as the ones writing the checks. And if not, there's a deeper conversation to be had.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Okay. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you for that. That was an amazing opening segment. That was an amazing opening segment, and it sets the tone for your story. So we like to say at the Purposeful Professional that we are the podcast for the people, career, and the culture. So we like to talk about who you are as people, because I believe, and we believe, that our careers often stem from our early experiences, our foundational personality traits, values, even the things that have shaped us before we even knew that they really shaped our outlook. So I want you to bring me back to your childhood in St. Martin. How did you first get involved in, like, youth leadership and youth parliament efforts?
I love how you begun that segment, right? Because I always say, as individuals, we're an amalgamation of our subjective experiences, and these experiences shape us into the individuals who we are today. So when I look back at my youth leadership journey, I always have to, like, shout out this one friend. Her name is Muriel Jean Michel. And she was the one who was like, Dwayne, I've heard you speak. You have a lot of potential, and I would like to invite you to this thing called the Youth Parliament. Now, I wasn't involved in a lot of extracurriculars, and we'll touch on it later. I was actually working after school and doing those things to, like, obviously get extra cash and everything, but to gain experience, because that's what it was. It's like, you're gonna finish high school and then you're gonna work. So that was the mindset back then. And then she introduced me to the youth parliament, and then I came to the meeting, and they're like, hey, the following week we have speeches to get a position to work with a parliamentarian. You should try out. Within 1 week, I wrote a speech, I had a position, and that's where my journey began, by someone saying, hey, Dwayne, I think you have a lot of potential. Can you attend this meeting? And by attending this meeting, it opened so many opportunities for me, because not only did I started the youth parliament, I got invited to be part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands Youth Parliament, where they brought from all the Dutch Caribbean islands and the Netherlands came down to St. Martin for, like, a 3-day experience. I got to present to Her Royal Highness Princess Beatrix. Then that paved the way for me to be invited to be part of the National Development Plan Steering Committee on the island, then the president of the Youth Parliament. Like, it opened an opportunity for me by someone just saying, hey, we think you have potential. And this is where we talk about the proximity. Like, everyone has, like, there's a lot of talent to go around, but The opportunity wasn't there for me, and it wasn't something that I would have sought out on my own.
Wow. Okay. We need to shout her out because for her to see your potential and to actually push you in that direction, I always say it's those people, it's that still small voice in our lives, whether it's a person or even sometimes our own intuition that tells us, hey, you can do a bit more, you can be a bit more. And I think it's wonderful that she was that person for you. She saw that in you and she was able to get you to see those possibilities. And of course, I know what she saw in you because I talked about it too. I feel like Dwayne can command the room. And she saw that ability to command and to lead. And, it's not easy for everyone to do that. So when you have that special gift, you do need to use that. So I want to know, like, what did your involvement in these activities reveal or change about your values or your aspirations? What did Youth Parliament give you that changed your outlook moving forward?
It reminds me of a quote that I have in my email and I've used for years now, which again, Muriel is the one who introduced me to Dr. Miles Monroe in terms of his philosophy and teaching, which is the greatest tragedy in life is not death, but a life without a purpose. And I started living and embodying that quote to figure out what is my purpose in life. And back then, I thought my purpose in life was just to just graduate and then work and take a job and live a normal life. But by joining the youth parliament, it was like to be a voice for young people. That was my mission, to put motions forward in parliament, to share my insights on what the development and the future of the island look like. So that's how it shaped my impact and my outlook. And of course, it gave me the ability to use my voice and to practice more. And it paved the way for me being here today in this position that I am in at Watson Institute.
I 100% love that. And I definitely can see where it's those opportunities that we get that make us feel like this is why I do what I do. This is what makes me feel alive. And you, honestly, like even getting to shake hands with Miles Monroe is just epic because he was probably one of the greatest motivational speakers to ever walk the earth. And also, his leadership on so many fronts, whether spiritual, motivational, religious, he's given us so many great quotes. And I love that quote because I think it exemplifies the fact that we are here for a reason. We are here for a purpose. And I'm grateful that you found that to be your purpose, being a voice for young people and sticking up for young people.
Yeah, most definitely. And then small little thing, I didn't get to shake his hand. I just got to learn about his teaching. So I didn't get to although I wished I did had the opportunity to meet him before he passed. But yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'm here envisioning you shaking his hand. Okay. Well, it's wonderful that his leadership and his insight touched you. And I agree, like the greatest tragedy is a life lived without purpose because we have a purpose. So I want to know, like you talked about in our pre-call about your adoption and being adopted. And I want to kind of get into that because I think that might be such a defining moment for a lot of people, but also a moment of purpose. Like we're talking about purpose during this conversation. So how did your adoption shape your ability to be a leader and have a positive impact in your community?
That's actually a good one. And now that I think about it, I think my mindset on multiculturalism, on accepting different cultures that's what my adoption shaped because I was born on the island of Antigua. When I was 4 months, I moved to St. Martin. My dad is Guyanese. My dad is Antiguan. My mom is Guyanese. My adoptive mom is from St. Lucia, and my adoptive dad is from Dominica. And then, of course, in our neighborhood and everything, it's just like a melting pot of different cultures. And of course, culturally, I grew up as a St. Martiner. So because of these different influences in my life, I had to recognize from an early age that people communicate differently. People have different cultural norms, practices, and that is why I say we always are we're the sum of our subjective experiences. So it caused me to even be interested in what shapes the mindset or viewpoint or perception or perspective of an individual based on their culture.
Yeah. When you said all those islands, I was like, you were raised in the Carib Massive because you have all these islands and those influences. But no, that's amazing that it taught you the value of not just taking things for face value. Because I think people will say something as simple as, my family's Caribbean, my family's Jamaican. And people will take something as simple as why do you all eat rice and peas every Sunday as just a coincidence? But no, it's a tradition. It's something that my grandparents did, that their grandparents did, that now my parents do, that now we do. Like there's a reason behind it. There's a story behind it. There's a significance behind it. So it's wonderful that you were able to, number one, get exposure to so many different islands, but number two, learn that there is significance behind our experiences and the things that we do. And we don't just do them because we do them. Like, learn about the deeper reasons why people do things, and why we are who we are.
Yeah, and then it's like, when you look at it, like, your family is the one who starts to shape your worldview, right? They tell you what to believe. They tell you if you should go to church, or all these different things. You grow up in the Caribbean, right? And then as you reach a certain age, then you start to question these values, right? Am I really aligned with what, like, my parents have, like, fed me all these years, right? And like, with my adoptive parents, for them, they only went to elementary school, right? So for me, going to high school was an accomplishment, right? And in their mindset, the accomplishment was, oh, you finish high school, get a job. Because, like, for us, we only had elementary, and we had to work from since, like, the sixth grade onwards. Whereas for me, that is when I started questioning. I was like, is this what life is supposed to be? Because ain't no way. And then when the youth parliament and all these things come in, then you started to see the tension between me and, like, family members, because it was like, oh, Dwayne is trying to be rebellious. Dwayne wants to go to college. Dwayne wants to do all these different things that we're not in a position, like, to, like, even help him and support him in achieving. So I had to, it was a dilemma and a dynamic that I had to navigate, and understanding the different cultures, communication styles, all these different things is what helped me along the way.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And trust me when I say, so just a little story time for you all. I relate to what you're saying. First of all, that's something that my parents went through. Both of my parents were first generation in their family to attend and graduate from college. So that whole thing of, you want to do something and you should do it, but your parent, even if your parent might be supportive on the surface, they might not fully understand the weight or the gravity of what you're doing. So I grew up seeing that. And then also, just to kind of give a little aside, many of us in the Caribbean culture, like you said, we're raised to think a certain way about jobs, about careers, about what's acceptable or what's not. So you were raised to think like college is not necessary, go to school. A lot of us who were we were given pro college messages. We were also given entrepreneurship is not necessary. You better get a job, get a 401k, get a good pension. So many of us have had to break the mold. And one thing, when you were saying what you were saying, I was like, yes, a Caribbean family will tell you what to do until you die. Trust me, they will plan your whole life out for you. So you better know what your dreams are, your vision is, and your goal is. So I love that. And I think that was such a relatable response. So speaking of college, I want to know, because I remember when I first encountered the Watson Institute, I didn't know that they had an actual like program, entrepreneurship collegiate program at Lynn University. So I want to hear a little bit more about your experience navigating that. So tell me about your journey from the Caribbean to Watson Institute at Lynn University. How did you end up in the social entrepreneurship program, and what was your journey to choosing that program?
I was on the National Development Plan Steering Committee in St. Martin. And within the 2-year period that I was on that committee, we saw 3 different prime ministers steer that committee because of so many different coalition governments. And I was like, change is not going to happen, because everyone who comes in has a different idea, has a different vision. And I was like, I can't make change in this arena. And when we talk about change, lasting change. So I started to look for different programs that I can go out before even like, thinking about college. I wanted to take like a year to really like think about what I can do. So there are 2 programs I saw on Youth Opportunities. One was a summer, like 8-week program at the United Nations mandated University for Peace in International Security and Development. And then the other one was a Watson Institute 2016 fall incubator program. That's what it was back in 2016. So I applied to both of them. The Watson deadline was like 2 days before the deadline. I didn't have a venture or anything, but I created a venture. I wanted to create the Griffith Initiative for Global Citizenship. And I put the ideas of like multicultural understanding, all those different things together, submitted an application for that, submitted an application for UPeace, and I got into both. So I spent the summer in Costa Rica in 2016, learning about international development, conflicts around the world, all those different things, and then sustainable development. And then I attended Watson for the fall of 2016 to just do a semester in their program. One semester became 2 semesters. Then they're like, hey, we're launching a degree program in 2018. If you stay with us, be a community advisor for a year, support the entrepreneurs in the program while still, like, being an entrepreneur yourself. You can go and be like one of our pioneer fellows down there to bring the Watson culture. So I waited, I got into the program, and I was the resident advisor for all the Watson fellows. So really taking that Watson culture from their semester long programs, bringing it into like, the whole degree. And that's how I got into like, the social entrepreneurship program down there in an accelerated route where I was able to like, complete my degree.
Thank you for sharing that story, because it just shows you that sometimes we go in a certain direction and we don't know how long we're going to be in that direction, because today you are working with the Watson Institute. But I love the fact that you were so open to, first of all, that Griffith Global Ambassadorship Program. We might need that, especially with what's happening around the world. So I always tell people, like, save your old ideas, because we might definitely need that. And I might see that in a couple of years. But I love the fact that you were so open to, going to Costa Rica, and then I'm going to Lynn University, and figuring out like, hey, I'm not necessarily going to commit to something, but I'm going to explore. Because I think one of the things that we lose as humans, especially those of us that are very ambitious, we lose that desire to like, everything doesn't have to make sense and I'm just going to live in that, versus having to plan everything out. So I love that you embrace this mindset of like, I'm going to try different things and I'm going to see what fits. And then, yeah, Watson Institute fit, because you said semester after semester, you kept coming back. So of course there was a fit there, but I love how you gave yourself the opportunity to not put so much pressure on trying to fit yourself into something, but rather like explore and try to figure out, what the best fit is for you.
Yeah, and then just like, going back to my adoption, like going to the US, like, Boulder, Colorado, for out of every place, like, they didn't even have a phone number on the website to like, call us. So my parents are like, this is a scam. They didn't really support the idea of like, going to this. So for me, all my life, even graduating during the pandemic and doing all the things that I've done, it's always been about figuring it out. Right. And I think growing up on an island, it teaches you a lot of resilience, because on a small island, there's only so much resources and you have to be resourceful, make things work, like be adaptable. And I think be resilient throughout, like, the ups and the downs. And that is what has got me to this point. Like, in the past year and 10 months, almost 11 months, actually, I've grown so much within even just becoming an employee at Watson Institute, from a program manager to the vice president of programs, which is a huge, like, shift. I've just been like, moving up, and it's all about that same mentality. It's just giving it an opportunity to understand and learn from your mistakes and continue growing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're talking about is the heart of the entrepreneurial mindset. And we're going to get into that entrepreneurship bridge that you build. But that's the heart of the entrepreneurial mindset. It is knowing how to make do with and find the best in every single opportunity in your life. And I think that I come from the opposite world of like, you need to have everything planned out. And there's something wonderful, also scary, I have to say, because you talked about resilience, and the islands will teach you resilience. But for many of us that were raised in the US, compared to some of the stuff happening in the islands in the lap of luxury, we're not as resilient. And when things don't go our way, we're freaking out. But like you said, like, growth comes from the unexpected, embracing the things that we never thought we would do or try. So I love that. I love that. And I love the fact that you were able to find so much growth through your time at Watson.
Yeah, and it's like, when things go wrong on the island, what are you going to do? Swim to another island?
No.
Like, you can't really do that. You got to problem solve. Like, when 2017, I was here in the US when Hurricane Irma and Maria destroyed and flattened the island. The airport is still being built back to this day, right? Like, I came home in my neighborhood 4 months later. There was still no electricity in my household. like, with my family because they were still working on fixing that. Some of my friends' house that I grew up with were flattened, right? Completely. And what you have to do is build back and build back better. And it's the same thing with your confidence, your self esteem. When life hits you really hard, you got to build it back up and you got to build it back up better. And then you go through another challenge, it breaks you down again. And you go through that cycle over and over again until you become a truly resilient person where these things, they happen to you, you go through it, you feel it, you embody it, and then you move on because life is not waiting for you. Like, time is flying by so quickly. Just yesterday, I felt it was like lockdown. They were kicking us off campus for like the pandemic. And now it's what, 2024?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. 4 years have passed and we survived. Well, not some people did not survive, but those of us who did survive, we survived and we're here to tell the tale and we're here and we're stronger. So I definitely love that. And yes, those who have relatives in the Caribbean, we know, or from the Caribbean, we know the difference between first world problems and the real problems. Like somewhere, there's family members. And I even have family members, hurricanes blew the roof off their house. My Jamaican family have experienced that. So I knew the difference between first world problems, my problems being Americanized and being in the US versus some of the problems like a lack of clean drinking water, even not having a roof on your house. Like these are some things that people face every day. And it's actually humbling to see it too, because it makes us realize a lot of the problems that I create are in my own head, and not necessarily life or death problems the way that I see them. So that's an interesting take.
You talk about the problems like we create, and I think it's like also all about exposure. So when I was talking about the Griffith Initiative for Global Citizenship, the whole concept there was to help people understand people through dialogue, right? And like your subjective experience or someone else's who grew up in the US, they might not have the exposure of like, oh, well, our power plant like takes electricity, they do load shedding, they do all these different things. So for us it's normal to like get a bucket, go take a shower, like do these different things. So when we come here and like electricity is gone for like a minute or something's wrong, we don't really freak out because it's a normal to us. But for someone who hasn't like gone through that, it's not their normal. So sometimes in conversations, by having these deep conversations, you can get to the root cause of like, okay, how does this person think this way? And instead of jumping and be like, you know what, it's first world problems, you don't really understand what like people have to go through in the world. It's like, why do they think that? And then how can you help them see what other people has been going through their entire like life basically, to help them understand that like maybe your problem is not as big as you think it is.
Yeah, let me tell you, I have like so many memories of just my upbringing and being told what was a problem versus what wasn't a problem. Because one thing Caribbean parents going to tell you is you better not cry over something that to them is nonsense. Okay. So I want to get into some parts about your career. So we're getting into the career section now. And one thing that I think is really interesting about your career is the fact that you bridge entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship so well. And you probably see the fact that some people tend to lean more towards the other. So I noticed, like, I would say in the innovation ecosystem, there's some people that are like diehard entrepreneurs, but like, I'll never start a business of my own because I'm too scared. And then there are the entrepreneurs that are like, I'm never going to work for anybody a day in my life because I hate that. And then there are the investors that like, I want to invest in companies, but I never found one because it's just too tough. So when I see people that readily embrace multiple parts of what I like to call the innovation ecosystem, I'm curious because I'm like, that's not what I see often. So my first question for you on your career is, you describe yourself as someone who works at the intersection of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship. How did you decide that you wanted to be an entrepreneur and entrepreneur? And for you, which one is harder to you, entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship, or and why?
Trial and error. Like, that's a simple answer. It's like you try something, you don't like it, you like it. Like people think that like, we have to have all things like, going back to what you said about planning, everything should be figured out. You look around, you see some people are getting married, you see some people are starting businesses, you see some people are doing exits, you see all of that going on around you. And then you're like, oh my God, I should have things like, more figure out. But like, everyone is on their own journey. And it's like, through trial and error is where you're going to figure out where you fit. For me, I've been on the entrepreneurship end, I've been on the entrepreneurship end. And where I thrive personally is, and of course, this has to do with student loans and all these other things that I'm paying off. It's like being an entrepreneur in a company that lets me be an entrepreneur as an entrepreneur. So let me break it down. So like, in some companies, I didn't thrive as well being an entrepreneur as an entrepreneur because they wanted me to fit in that entrepreneur box where they're like, okay, this is how we do things. This is how things are going to stay. We're not going to shake things up as much. Where my entrepreneurship spirit was like calling out for help. And it just made me less productive, less interested in like, continuing to work on the company for the company. Whereas at Watson now, they have given me the full opportunity to be an entrepreneur and build up the programs department like an entrepreneur would. So this whole pillar that I've been building across the past years, like, improving our summits, improving our base camp, improving a lot of the, like, the elements of our program. I've been doing it as an entrepreneur. I get to set the vision. I get to decide how things work, how I make the changes, which feeds that entrepreneurial creative side and that autonomy side where I feel like no one is like, confining me in the box that we're in right now on recording this, but like, no one's like, really confining me. And of course, I have the security of being an entrepreneur where I don't have to like, go through the struggles we talked about earlier in trying to find funding for a venture and all of that. Although I believe I can navigate it right now for this period in my life, I want to have that security and that creativity and autonomy at the same time.
Thank you for highlighting that because number one, you're right. It depends on the organization that you're in. Like that number one is the organization entrepreneur fit has to exist because I've been in places and spaces, hence why I completely just fell off of that track and decided to become an entrepreneur. I've been in spaces where my vision was not taken serious. And even if it wasn't my vision, it was a group vision, it was something that we came up with together as a team. It just wasn't taken seriously. Even when we had the data, even when we went through all the hoops that sometimes organizations want you to go through to prove that something is going to work. It still wasn't taken seriously. They still didn't see the value in it. So I love the fact that you found a place in a space that actually lets you be you and actually lets you experiment with the other program staff. And you all do a great job, I have to say, in creating and testing and doing new things, but also learning from it. I think that's the process that entrepreneurs need. And I love the fact that you said every organization isn't going to give you that as an entrepreneur. So I love that you said entrepreneur as an entrepreneur, because like that entrepreneurial spirit never dies. I have friends who are similar to you. They founded ventures and they decided to, return to the workforce because you know what? I think there's a myth that once you become an entrepreneur, you never can work for anybody ever again. Some entrepreneurs need to actually get a check, a stable check, because it's rough and it gets tough. But it's about, like you said, finding the places where, you're allowed to exercise some sort of vision. And I think entrepreneurship is so valuable. And also it has so much reward for someone who has that spirit, but like you said, might not be able to take on the direct risk involved in starting their own venture.
Yeah, most definitely. And like, when we talk about like, underrepresented or historically disenfranchised, like, entrepreneurs in general, the risk portion is what's difficult, right? Like, so when we look at it, it's like, many of them are working on their ventures, but they still have to like, have another job to like, pay the bills and like you survive basically in this economy that that we live in. So and that is why I said like at this present moment I'm working towards like I have goals and dreams of establishing a fund and doing all of that later down the line, but for now I need to like be in that entrepreneur mindset, learn from the entrepreneurs, like gain as much experience as I can, and then later down the line shift my focus into being a full-time entrepreneur, because that's always going to be like my passion, my skill set in terms of being public facing and supporting entrepreneurs. That's what I just love.
Yeah, no, and I feel like I see you doing it. I see you doing it. So I want to encourage you and tell you to hold on to that dream. So I know that like after you attended the social entrepreneurship program at Lynn University, what really motivated you to join Watson Institute as an employee? Because sometimes it's like, I like this. I like these people. I like the work they do, but I don't necessarily want to work there. But you jumped to work there. So I want to know, number one, like what motivated you? And then like what made you say yes to Watson's culture and the opportunity to mentor and guide social entrepreneurs from around the world?
Yeah, so it took me about 2 years. So I did work for different accelerators and incubators in between Watson, gaining some experience before, and then I did some startup experience, and then after that startup experience, I was like, okay, I want something a bit more stable. Obviously, I am from the Caribbean in this, so I'm on a H-1B. So I needed something definitely more stable. So I had the conversation with Watson and figuring out what they needed at the moment and recognized it was a growth period, right? When I joined Watson, we all had to pay for programming to be part of the program. And they recognized that that doesn't help them serve the entrepreneurs they really truly wanted to serve, but also who need the support to become to join a fully funded fellowship. So by recognizing and understanding that their business model has changed and they have been supporting the entrepreneurs that really align with what I want to do, I was like, okay, I'll take the risk and I'll join as a program manager. But when you look at Watson values, even as a fellow, they aligned with me. Impact is in our DNA, right? It's all about impact. Everything that we do, protect your courage. It's all about protecting the courage of others. And again, it's all about taking that leap of faith and helping people take that leap of faith into their entrepreneurial journey. So looking at the operational excellence, and I can list all the principles, but the final principle, which is come to the window, and it's all about coming and having a conversation and having dialogue with your team members when you disagree, just creating that environment where you can authentically be yourself and can have conversations with team members. And just from since I joined Watson, we have added 15 members to the team. So we grow from about 15 to 30 members on the team in the past year and 10 months. So it's been insane growth. And I think it was a really good decision. So values aligned, the opportunity to just take that risk as a program manager to see how it goes, start giving my input, being the entrepreneur that I was, and then actually seeing that it was so well received.
Yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing. And one thing I will say, so y'all, I was in Colorado witnessing how you all work together. I feel like there was a level of teamwork that I saw there that I haven't seen in other accelerators. And trust me when I say I've been to multiple programs. I'm always traveling, going somewhere. I feel like when I was in Colorado with you all, there was a teamwork energy that I've never seen. So I really sense from the jump that you all are tapped into that collaboration, not just hey, we want to serve the entrepreneurs, but also that you all care about the type of environment that you're creating for each other. I saw a little bit of that and I was like, okay, that's something I really, really like. And I also like the fact that us as fellows, we did not fight or have any drama. And that is rare because, usually at these sort of places, egos are high. All of people are competing and flexing and doing all different types of things. But the fact that those of us that were in Colorado last year, we're still friends to this day. It speaks to the fact that you all are truly you're fostering an environment that creates that positive energy for those that participate. And I love that. And I love the fact that you talked about the values as well, because those values aligning is really how you're supposed to be somewhere, when you see those values aligning and when you see yourself in how the organization operates.
Oh yeah, 100%. And even what you didn't see behind the surface level is at the same time while you all were there, I was onboarding about two members, almost a third, to the team. So our team was growing in that period. And the fact that we were growing and some of us were really new and were able to internalize that Watson culture, and you all were able to feel it, speaks a lot about the organization and the values and what they instill in people who join, and even the selection process of who do we find to run and lead these programs. All of those are really important touch points.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So I want to know, before we leave the career section and start talking about the cultural impact you want to have with your work, my last question for you is, in an ideal world, what do you want to accomplish through the Watson Institute, and how do you want to help to shape the future of social entrepreneurship in a global context?
Wow, that's a really deep one. And I think, like, I've been thinking about this in terms of, like, starting, well, in July, it is like, we'll be leading the design. I'll be leading the design and the implementation team, right? And what's interesting about that is I always thought about, like, what is the vision, right? And we want to help entrepreneurs in what we call the missing middle. So entrepreneurs who have started, but who are not far along enough as yet to, like, be accepted into a Techstars Y Combinator. So we want to be in that middle because there's a lot of support for earlier stage. There's a lot of support for later stage, but that missing middle is always, like, where people struggle to find support. So one, I want to create along with the team, some of the best programs where people can come in, and by the time they're done with the program, they're ready to apply to these, like, bigger programs so that they can receive the funding they need. Because we know at this present point in time in the moment, we can't provide entrepreneurs with the funding, but we can set them up for success. So that's where I think, like, the vision is going. It's like, we're running about 16-week fellowships a year now, from 2 when it was my day as a fellow to 6 of them, which is supporting so many, like, entrepreneurs, like, globally. And it's all about giving them access to knowledge, giving them access to resources, and finally positioning them in a space where they can be ready for access to funding.
Yeah, no, and that's amazing. I love the fact that you talked about the missing middle because that's what a lot of us are navigating, and especially the listeners know, but I was a fellow with Watson, and I actually do have like a testimonial of the fact that we have been accepted into corporate sponsorship programs just by having Watson on our resume. People get interested, so I know that the fact that you all are having this impact, even if you can't fund, I think having Watson on your resume is no small feat. It's the name does carry weight, and it does help you to get the attention of others. But I love the fact that you're talking about design and implementation and being intentional with who you serve, because you're right. There's a lot of support for those who are like YC Techstars level, but there's not a lot of support for people who are navigating the, like, should I shut this venture down? Can it work? That middle ground, I would say, like, when you're like a year, 2 years in, that middle ground can be hard to or in your first year, it can be hard to navigate. So I think, like, meeting so many founders who are in that middle lets me know that you all really know your mission and you really know what you've come to do, and what your purpose is. And I think that's why Watson has been so successful. People ask me all the time about Watson. So y'all are doing something. Something is cooking at Watson. I want to just let you know.
Yeah, no, and that's what I like to, like, hear in terms of your experience and, like, in the program, and how, like, beyond the program it has helped, right? Like, there's so many programs around the Truist Foundation Fellowship, the Western Union Foundation Fellowship, and our flagship fellowship. Like, we talk to so many entrepreneurs, and so right now I think when I look at it, it's almost up to 160 entrepreneurs annually we support. So, like, we have to continue doing the work, like, and that's annually directly, because majority of these entrepreneurs are hosting a base camp that's going to impact more lives. And I think to date already, we've impacted over 5,000 or 6,000 entrepreneurs through these, like, base camp, like, activities. So, like, the impact is definitely big and broad, but as a team, we always have to ground ourselves and be intentional about the programs we're designing, because we want the best experiences, like, for the fellows, but also making sure that when you leave the program, like, the legacy and being a fellow helps open other doors for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has. It has. And I'm always seeing Watson fellows be so successful. Like, somebody from the Venture Accelerator last year won a pitch competition. We're winning funding in other spaces. So it's really the gift that keeps on giving. But I want to talk about culture very quickly, because I know your heart is to not only serve the entrepreneurs here and across the world, but I know the Caribbean. And one thing that we love at this podcast is to talk about the cultural implications we hope our careers will have. Not we hope, but that we know our careers will have. Because I think in the 21st century, we aren't just satisfied with having a job. a lot of us want to have an impact. And like you said, we talked about on this podcast so eloquently today, we want to have a purpose, and we have a purpose, right, to impact others. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the work that you're doing in the Caribbean and how you see that playing a broader role in your career moving forward. So my first thing is I want to know about Islandpreneur, because when I heard that name, I was like, okay, such a fitting name. We've talked a little bit about some of the struggles that Caribbean entrepreneurs face. So my first question for you in this section is, talk to us about Islandpreneur. Like, why did you join as their chief strategist, and what are you and the founder, Ife Badejo, hoping to achieve with this organization?
Yeah, most definitely. I have to give a big shout out to Ife Badajo. She has been the founder of Island, Preneur, and before that, it was the Power Agency, so the Produce Wealth Revolution Agency, and she has been in entrepreneurship for years now, supporting entrepreneurs on our islands in terms of giving them resources and programs. And I think, Islandpreneur, when I joined, recently, I joined during, the pandemic, Islandpreneur, as their chief strategist in terms of, and we had to transition the Islandpreneur conference we were planning in person to something virtual. And that first virtual conference we did attracted about approximately 650 registrants from 35 different countries, a lot of them small islands, where we got to bring guest speakers and just really start having conversations on how do we support entrepreneurs on islands. So Ife's vision is for it to be a hub, a place where entrepreneurs on many different islands can come to for resources, advice. And obviously we're starting in St. Martin, and we've done work with the Central Bank of Curacao, and we've done a little cross island hopping. So it's still fairly small at the moment, with a primary focus on St. Martin, where there's the entrepreneurial youth pitch competition, where we get high school students to pitch their ventures, and then after they win, take them on a trip to Atlanta to experience a more global ecosystem. But the goal moving forward is to really create opportunities for entrepreneurs on small island developing states. And that is by starting by doing research, understanding the different islands, understanding the different needs, and then start to tailor-made resume to be this all-encompassing hub for entrepreneurs on islands.
I love that. I love the fact that you all have that vision to bring those islands together. And I also love the integration of small islands, because with the Caribbean, sometimes we act like it's just the DR, Haiti, Cuba, Jamaica, Antigua. We don't get into the many islands that make up the Caribbean. So I love that you all are thinking holistically about the Caribbean and about the different islands that make it up. But also, we talked a lot on this episode about just the fact that entrepreneurship is survival out there. It is survival. I'm sure, in the Caribbean, you've been exposed to the markets and how you'll see entrepreneurs selling in the market. That type of sustenance entrepreneurship, where, whether they're selling sun hats, or they're selling, shirts, or they're selling even mango, a mango on ice, and et cetera, different things like that. People are selling coconuts. People are selling all different types of things in the Caribbean, especially in the markets out there. So entrepreneurship is survival. And I love the fact that you all are looking for ways to not only create an environment where they can survive, but where they can thrive.
Even me myself, used to sell mangoes in front of my house. We would pick the mangoes and I'll put a chair outside in front of my door. And as people drive by and walk by, we would sell it. And it's that mindset, I think, one of the things, Ife has been working on in her personal consulting, journey for Islandpreneur, is helping entrepreneurs understand, the difference. When it's for survival, for your survivorship, it's all about, okay, I'm going to make money and then I'm going to pay my bills directly, or I'm going to do this. And the way entrepreneurship is done is very different than here. And it's starting with the little steps of teaching entrepreneurs, even if you're making this funding, how do you pay yourself a salary, right? These are the things. How do you pay yourself a salary? How do you set up a little budget that is separate than, oh, this is just me. The business is me. And when the business doesn't go well, you feel like a failure. So it's also that mindset shift of okay, you are not your venture is your venture, and you are you, and you're working for your venture. Now, things may not go well in your venture, but how do we create systems to start that separation so that you can identify the issue areas in your venture that needs fixing, and then we can fix that and then grow the business, or take the steps necessary versus when something doesn't work out, you feel like the failure.
Yeah, no, that's a lot. That's a huge point. And I love the fact that you talked about systems. And I would also add vision because, honestly, like I have memories of being in Jamaica and seeing everybody sell fish, coconut, seeing people sell all different types of things on the side of the road. And sometimes you see, especially if you are the type of person who you have a vision. And I know you and it sounds like you and Ife align on having that vision. You see more for the founders than they see for themselves. And I love the fact that you all are talking about systems because it takes that system to go from I'm selling fish in my backyard, I'm selling fried fish and ackee and saltfish in my backyard to actually having a restaurant, to actually having a food truck, to actually building a system that can go beyond me. So I love that. I love that. And I see where that's needed. So my last question for you is, what do you think it will take for the Caribbean to become economically resilient? And what role do you think Islandpreneur will play in that process?
We're already on the stages in terms of when we talk about economic resilience, people are seeing the potential of many startups, companies, investments. A lot of things are happening. Obviously, there we live in a hurricane belt, especially our islands there. So there's always going to be natural disasters that affect that economic resilience. And I think people investing are always wary of that. What happens, when a hurricane happens and comes and wipes out, majority of some of the islands. So what happens there? Climate change, all those different things affect us heavily, even if we're not the strongest, polluters or contributors, to it. We will definitely feel the effects. So I think understanding that and when people starting to invest and stuff like that, they need to understand these components of these islands, but still understand that we're still worthy of being invested in. And then the final component is that with Islandpreneur, and I think about this, what it is with Islandpreneur and Ife, or what my personal career vision is basically establishing a fund to support entrepreneurs, specifically on small island developing states. And that can be in the Caribbean, in the Pacific. Once you're in a small island developing state, the goal is to establish a fund to particularly support these entrepreneurs, and not only support these entrepreneurs with the funding, but with the resources and the tools so that we see a higher likelihood of success in their ventures.
You know what's funny? I love that this podcast, I'm exposed to so many people with great dreams and great vision. And I know that number one, you're going to do it because I feel like I see it for you. I see you having that fun. Not only that, I see myself being an investor in the fund. Hopefully I'll get to that point where I could be a limited partner because, my ancestry is Caribbean, but I also have family struggling down there. I'm not going to act like I come from wealth. I don't. And I've seen what it looks like to go from nothing to something out there. And I know that with that fund that you're building and even with Islandpreneur, it can happen. So I see that. I see it for you 100%. And I'm so grateful that you are on the podcast to tell that story. So I can say, yes, I interviewed Dwayne before he built that big fund in the Caribbean. I interviewed him right here and I know him and I'm an investor in it. And I know so many people as well will see this episode and be inspired by your story. So the last thing, the very, very last thing, we like every guest to put out a purposeful professional statement. So I want you to repeat after me. I'll give you a sample. My name is Soraya and I'm a purposeful professional because I operate at the intersection of ideation and innovation for social good and social change. That's kind of just my statement. But I want you to give your own statement to just kind of close us out in a really, really powerful way. So if you can repeat after me, my name is Dwayne Griffith and I'm a purposeful professional because you can finish the sentence.
My name is Dwayne Griffith and I'm a purposeful professional because I sit in the intersection of entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. And I believe anyone can be a change maker. Your age, your experience, your position in society that do not matter. A change maker is someone who takes the resources and influence change in the lives of others. And I believe you all can do it because I'm here, a living proof, working with all the amazing entrepreneurs who are doing it.
Yeah. All right, Dwayne. Thank you. That's it. That's the end. This was a powerful episode. This was so cultural. I feel like, this feels like fried plantains to me. Smells and tastes like it.
Yes.
I'm hungry. I'm hungry and I haven't had fried plantains in a while. So I'm getting a fried plantain vibe from this episode. This episode feels like plantain chips. I love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I'm so grateful that you did this interview. All right, y'all. So that's it. It's me, Soraya from The Purposeful Professional, and we'll be back next week. Take care. I truly loved recording this episode. As someone with Caribbean roots myself, a shout out, or should we say big up, to the island of Jamaica. I felt deeply connected to Dwayne's story and his passion. He is a true builder and innovator, and I admire his ability to apply his entrepreneurial skills in different contexts. When he does build his fund, I will be there. I admire his passion, his resilience, and his desire to apply his education and skill set to help the Caribbean, one of the most culturally vibrant yet under-resourced areas in the world. This episode spoke directly to my Caribbean heart, well, almost like my ancestors were present on this one. I hope his journey inspires you to reflect on how your culture has impacted and shaped your career interests and how you can give back to your homeland. Anyway, this is Soraya, and we're out with the podcast for the people, your career, and the culture. Bye.